Are you pregnant or a new parent looking to ensure a better postpartum experience? Or are you a birth worker looking to improve your postpartum care skills? Check out Thriving After Birth, an online self-paced course by me, midwife and educator Tanya Tringali. It's 10 and a half hours of video content featuring experts in lactation, mental health, pelvic floor health, pediatric sleep issues. You also get worksheets and a workbook, as well as options to have a one-on-one session with me. Sign up at motherwitmaternity.com/thriving, and let's improve postpartum care together. My guest today is Betsy Freeman. She's a certified nurse midwife in Portland, Oregon. She's also a single mother by choice and is on a mission to provide better support, education, and options to others on this path. I asked Betsy to come on today to help me better understand the needs of this population. On one hand, I want to believe that my methods would apply to all, and that empathy is enough to help me provide good care to anyone in any circumstance. But I know better. There are many things that we providers, as well as friends and family of people on this path, could benefit from knowing so that we could be more supportive. Oh, and a gentle reminder that nothing we discuss on this show should ever be considered medical advice. Please speak to your local provider about anything that comes up in this show that resonates with you and your needs and your healthcare.
Hello.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much, Bessie, for talking to me today.
It's my absolute pleasure. So happy to be here.
Thank you. Okay, so if you wouldn't mind starting off, I would love it if you would tell our listeners a little bit about your midwifery journey, because I believe that precedes your journey of becoming a single mother by choice. So I'd love to hear
how it all happened.
Both of those stories.
Of course. Yeah, so I went to Emory University for undergrad, and I studied anthropology and ecology. And shortly after I graduated, I ended up going into the Peace Corps. And I didn't, at that point, I didn't know I wanted to be a midwife. I had heard about midwives in one of my anthropology classes, and I was sort of like, what is this midwife? Curious about the profession. And when I went to Mauritania in West Africa for the Peace Corps, and I was an agroforestry volunteer, but I ended up getting the opportunity to see a birth. And it was funny because none of the health volunteers wanted to go see a birth, but I was like, ooh, I want to see, I want to check it out. So we went to just myself and another volunteer went to a clinic, a rural clinic, and we saw a birth together. And it was one of those pinnacle moments in my life where it was so intense and so amazing. And, just sort of watching a woman push a baby out, I was like, there's no way, there's no way that baby's coming out. And sure enough, the baby came out, and it was just, it was just awesome. And I, later that night, it's like, I want to be a part of that. I want to be, I want to be somehow affiliated with birth. And so I finished up my service and went back to Massachusetts, where I was from. And I became a doula there and volunteered at a hospital in Boston, and then decided to apply to midwifery school. I sort of debated between becoming, a doctor versus public health, because I wanted something where I could actually go back overseas, because I really enjoyed my time volunteering as a Peace Corps volunteer. So I ended up deciding to pursue midwifery because it spoke to me more than medical school and more than public health. It just felt like, I've always been a people person, and, really had a sense of caring for my friends and my family. So I felt really drawn to the profession. So I ended up going to Columbia in New York City and did their direct entry program. So I did nursing school into midwifery. It was a 3-year program. It was very intense. And I went right into practicing as a midwife in New York. And my first job was in Queens. And I worked at um, that hospital for 4 years. And then I ended up kind of moving around to several different hospitals in New York. So that's sort of how I got into midwifery. You know, my plan was to always sort of go back overseas. And so, you know, I loved being able to work in New York because I ended up taking care of a lot of patients that were from different countries. So it felt very international, this career. Like I was going to the hospital, taking care of underserved patients, but then I could like go back to Manhattan and, you know, go out for drinks with friends. And so I kind of had the best of both worlds. Um, and you know, at a certain point, and this kind of segues a little bit into, you know, becoming, you know, wanting to become a single mother by choice, but I decided that I wanted to do Doctors Without Borders. That was another dream of mine that I had had. And so I ended up in my late 30s going overseas again. And I did 3 missions for Doctors Without Borders in Central African Republic, the Congo, and Nigeria. So I did 3, you know, 3 month. Well, let's see, it was a total of 12 months over the course of 2 years. So I had some breaks in between those. So that's sort of my midwifery career.
Well, that's really interesting to me because Doctors Without Borders has been on my list of possible things I might do in my future since before I was a midwife. I haven't ever done it. I've done international work in other capacities and shorter stints also, just because I was a single mother raising a kid also. And then when I decided to like break free and start this business and do all the crazy things I've been doing now for a few years, I'm always like, if I fail, I can go work for Doctors Without Borders. If I fail, I can go work for Doctors Without Borders.
Yep, they always need midwives. They're always needing midwives. So you will always have an opportunity to go.
Okay, so after that, tell me more. Tell me how it moves into you starting to feel like you were ready to be a parent.
Yeah. So, you know, my story, you know, that story is a little bit in parallel where, you know, I always knew I wanted to have a family. You know, I spent my 30s kind of, you know, dating, but not finding the right person. And, you know, just sort of feeling like I had time, like all my friends were getting married. And I was like, okay, they're getting married. I'm a bridesmaid. This is great. I'm an auntie. This is great. They're having their first kid, their second kid, their third kid sometimes. And you know, I just kind of kept doing my thing. And part of my thing was like, okay, I want to do Doctors Without Borders. I'm going to go, you know, go overseas and go to Africa. I'm going to be in the Congo for 3 months. And, you know, but I had this simultaneous, like this voice inside me, this itch, this longing, like, I know I want to have a baby. You know, I really don't want to do it on my own. I had, you know, I knew about single mothers by choice, but I was really hesitant because I wanted the dream. I wanted, you know, in quotations, like I wanted to fall in love and, you know, start a family with somebody. And I really you know, really from like 35 to 40, I was like pretty calm about it. 35, 36. I was like 38, I'll start, you know, really kind of, you know, what do I do now? Had sort of a short list of male friends that I was going to talk to about donating sperm. And you know, at some point I looked at one of the, you know, the sperm banks, and it was just like so bizarre. Like it was kind of like online dating and Amazon at the same time. You're like, you know, add sperm to cart. And I just was like, this is too weird. I can't do this. So, you know, I was aware of it and I knew it was a possibility, but I just didn't think that was going to be my reality. And so for me, there was a lot of, you know, almost like anger and, you know, just like almost like not understanding, like where did I go wrong? Like I dated, you know, I just assumed like if I just kept doing the fun things and interesting and adventurous things, that eventually I would meet somebody that I was compatible with. So I really kind of hit this point of kind of devastation and despair, you know, like around 39, 40. You know, at the time I was seeing a therapist, and really kind of talking it through, and you know, she said, well, which do you want? Do you want the partner or do you want the baby? And I was like, I want both, I want it all. And, kind of put things in place where I was considering doing an IUI, an intrauterine insemination at 39, but then kind of panicked and said, no, I'm just going to furiously date between 39 and 41, which is, it's not a good place for either myself or the people I'm dating to kind of date frantically to find somebody, to have a baby with.
So quick question for you. When you had that thought where you might pause and do an IUI at that point, was it a male friend who was going to donate a sperm, or were you looking at the put the sperm in the cart situation?
Yeah. Yeah. So I started talking to a friend who had previously said, oh, I would give you sperm. And so we started having a conversation. And I think when it became more of a reality, he kind of backpedaled and wasn't so sure. And so that kind of fell off the table. And then I had another friend that I was talking to about it, and he said yes. And then he kind of backpedaled too. So I sort of had these two, that was another kind of, major disappointment. So, again, like trying to quickly meet somebody and then try to have a baby with them was kind of my my thought at that point, which, in retrospect, I'm glad that didn't work out. So fast forward, and at 41 is actually when I started trying to get pregnant. And, I started with IUI. I started at a clinic in New York, and, they did some lab work. I had not had day 3 labs. We can talk about that at some point, but, did some fertility testing, and it was already concerning. The nurse that was taking care of me said, oh, this is not looking great. And I was like, what do you mean that's not looking great? And, she also drew an anti-Mullerian hormone that came back, and it was, it's essentially looking at your egg reserve, and it was very, very low, even for my age of 41. And I just remember her saying to me, I don't even know if you would respond to IVF, like, I don't even know if that's an option for you. And I was like, what do you mean not an option? Like, I kind of always thought, well, there's always IVF. I can always do IVF. But, learned the hard way that, yes, IVF buys you some time, but at a certain age, and it's a little bit different for all of us, even if you give all the medication in the world, you stimulate those ovaries, they're only going to produce 1 egg, maybe, or maybe 2 if you're lucky. So that was kind of my scenario, was that I had such a low AMH, so few eggs left, that, I was referred to a reproductive endocrinologist that already said, I don't even think it's worth doing this round with us. There's a doctor in New York, New Hope Fertility, and they essentially, the doctor there sees a lot of women in New York who wait until their 40s to have children, and they do a mini IVF where they stimulate you just with a little bit of medication, not like the big guns, a little bit of medication, kind of plump up your one lone egg, make it as good as they can. And then they do a retrieval every month, or, however often you get those eggs, they retrieve them, and then they kind of stockpile them. And then eventually you do a transfer if you get some normal eggs, and then normal embryos out of those eggs. So that was sort of my next phase of trying. And it was so trying. I ended up doing that for about 7 or 8 months, and I got 1 day 5 blastocyst that was normal, that was chromosomally normal, because I did have them tested. So I had one that's just that lone embryo, and I did that transfer, and it didn't work. So, my despair kind of hit a whole new level, where I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't really want to do this on my own to begin with. And now I'm not going to get pregnant at all. And so really hit a low. And, all along people had said, well, you can always consider, using an egg donor. And I was like, I don't want to use an egg donor. I want to use my own eggs, that just, again, like, this is the way I want it. I want it to go this way. And so it took me about a year from that transfer with my own egg to deciding to go with an egg donor. And I went through a program at California Conceptions, and they have a pretty excellent track record where they have a money back guarantee. So if you qualify for the program, they offer 3 transfers for a pretty reasonable amount, and if it doesn't work, you get your money back. So they really believe that if your uterus is normal and you don't have any, if you're not ruled out from their program, like, they can get you pregnant. Is their motto.
At this point, and I'm sure I'm literally stockpiling questions as you talk that I didn't even know I had until you started talking, but I'm not going to ask you all of them because I assume that you're going to come back to some of them. But, quickly, where are you at this point in terms of like out of pocket? What is insurance covering? Like, what's the story with all of that?
Well, I had pretty decent coverage. I had United at the time, and I think they had like a $10,000 lifetime coverage. And honestly, I did not keep track of how much money I spent. So I can't even give you like, an estimate. I mean, I could probably give you an estimate. So I definitely went through the 10,000. The mini IVF, the way that they kept costs down was that they would do their retrievals without anesthesia because they were only retrieving 1 egg. It was quite painful, but cheaper. I know it's so brutal. So at least because otherwise when you're doing like a regular round of IVF, I mean, it can be anywhere, 15 to 25,000, I mean, there's a wide range depending on medication and the state that you're doing it in, and all those things. But the program at the time at California Conceptions was 3 transfers for $12,000. And it was they were not chromosomally tested embryos at the time. Now I think it's gone up to 15,000. And then if you do embryos, if you use embryos that are chromosomally tested, then I think it might even be like 19,000 or something like that. So meaning that it's a higher success rate if you know that the embryo is normal chromosomally. So, at this point for me in the journey, I put down the $12,000. I was living in Portland. I still am, but living in Portland and then having to fly down to California to do an ultrasound initially to see if I was approved for the money back guarantee, which I was. And then for each transfer, I had to go down twice. They would do a lining, check the lining of my uterus once. I had to do that on site. And then I would come back and do the transfer. And my first transfer did not work, but the second one did work. So I was successful with the second one. So I was paying also for airfare and then also for medication. At that point, my insurance had changed and covered some of it, but not all of it. So again, yeah, I mean, I bet you over the course, I went through that $10,000 through insurance, and then probably on top of that, I would say at least $25,000 out of pocket.
Wow.
At least, yeah.
Wow. Okay. So, how long are you into this process at the point where this second transfer now is this is your child?
This is my son. Yeah. So at that point when it worked, I was 44. So I tried from 41 until 44 and had my son just shy of my 45th birthday. So yeah.
So how was the pregnancy?
The pregnancy went actually relatively smoothly. I did have some vaginal bleeding, like around 12 weeks, which was, scary, but it is common with IVF. And then I did have gestational diabetes. I mean, one of the risks of being an older mom is having GDM, as you know. And I did have, some just like not severe nausea in the beginning. I was really scared of the nausea because I get nauseous pretty easily. So that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And of course, I was, expecting all the worst because I'm a midwife and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to, develop HELP syndrome and, be that maternal death and, all these worst case scenarios. But it went relatively easy. And then I was in induction at 39 weeks. Now that the recommendation is induction for anyone that's over 40 at 39 weeks. So I was like, fine, sign me up. And from my admission to delivery was about 24 hours. So I was really proud of myself. Not that
You had a vaginal delivery.
I had a vaginal birth. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. And how old is your child now?
So he just turned 5, Ben.
Awesome. Very cool. Did you breastfeed?
I did. I had some challenges for sure. It was really, his latch was never great. And so I think he wasn't getting enough and wasn't causing my, my milk production to go up. So it was like this, kind of worst case scenario of him just like wanting to feed all the time, not getting enough. I had very, very sore nipples, like that kind of tingly nipple pain. Yeah, I had a midwife friend at the time who, heard that I was having problems, and she's like, I'm bringing over a quiche. And she came over and she's like, I saw 6 lactation consultants. And I finally figured out that I had to like nurse my son with his feet up here, and she's like, I know it's, you would think like, oh, we're midwives, like we know how to do this, but it really was, I did end up seeing 3 lactation consultants, and the third one really, worked with me. And I think the thing that really helped was that after I nursed him in the morning, then I did that pump right afterwards to kind of empty the breast, stimulate more. And I think just time, like eventually his mouth just got bigger and was able to latch better. But even I'd hoped to do it for 2 years, and at like 10 or 11 months, he started biting me. And, that was kind of I think we just both looked at each other. We're like, we're over this. We're done. No more breastfeeding, which was sad. I was very disappointed that I couldn't do it for longer, but proud of myself that I pushed through as much as I did. So yeah, it was not easy.
Can you tell us a little bit about sort of while you were still pregnant, how much did you understand about what you needed to set up for after the baby was born in order to be successful as a single parent? And how much of that has evolved? And I'm assuming this is going to kind of eke into your story of how it occurred to you that something needed to be done. Somebody needed to create some additional supports for people who had been through what you've been through.
Yeah. So I ended up, after I had my son, I had a couple people sort of, offer like, oh, I could come visit you for a week and stay with you. Or, my mom and my brother said, well, we can come right after you have the baby. And, I ended up kind of saying, well, I'll figure it out. Like I'll the first couple of weeks, like I'll be okay. And maybe you can come, a couple of weeks afterwards, or, week after. And in retrospect, I think having somebody there in those first weeks, I mean, and this is not true for everyone. I mean, my reasoning was that, well, I have to get up anyways with the baby. I'm going to have to get up and nurse him. So to hire somebody or to have somebody there, what are they really going to do? But I think, because I was having this, supply issue, and he wasn't getting enough, he was waking up a lot. And I didn't have a lot of really, really rough nights, but there was a handful of them. And it's crazy making. I mean, I'm sure, I don't know your story, but anyone with a newborn, I mean, you're lucky if you're like, if they're a great nurser and you're getting like chunks of time to sleep. And, that eventually happened like around a month. I think we kind of got into a little bit more of a routine, but those first 4 weeks, it was like, grin and bear it. And, my family did come. My mom, my brother came like week 2. And that was just great because they weren't like sleeping over or anything, but they they would arrive in the morning and I could just kind of, veg out, and they would bring groceries, and at least having people around, like it's very lonely, and you don't really have someone checking up on you. Like, do you have postpartum depression? Are you so sleep deprived that you're a danger to yourself and your baby? Like, go outside, walk around the block. Because it really is such a fragile and raw time. I mean, it's amazing and beautiful, and you have your baby finally, but that sleep deprivation and everything is new is just a time when I wish that I had, I'd had more help. I think, had like a postpartum doula who was like spending the night, and just like when you're in that crisis moment, like, here, I'll take the baby, go lie down, or I'll take the baby, go take a shower. So that's been my recommendation for people, in my courses, my support groups is, get that support, whether it's a family member or a doula or a babysitter or whatever it is. And if you don't have that, then at least having, and this is what I did do, is somebody set up a meal train so that I had people coming in every day. But, in those situations, it was more like, hey, and more of like a catch up, and how was the birth? And, here's some food, which was great. But I think more hands-on help, and especially at nighttime.
Well, hands-on help, but also it doesn't matter how much you know. You're not supposed to have to be your own midwife at this point. You need someone to make suggestions for you. Like, I know how hard I push sometimes to get someone to finally get out the door for the first time. Like, you need some fresh air and sunshine, but they don't do it the first time I say it. But when they finally do, they're like, oh, I'm so glad I did that. So there's value in just having somebody look at you from the outside and say, this is what I think I'm seeing. And that doesn't have to be a professional, but it has to be somebody who cares about you.
Yeah.
But I think, like, it must have been so hard to be a midwife and know so much and say, well, who's going to come in here and know what I know? And nobody else can nurse the baby for me. And I get all of these layers kind of compounded on themselves. But I'm actually really glad to hear that your advice now is sort of nicer than what you did to yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's pretty common with a lot of women that end up going this route is, I've got it. Like, I'm an independent woman and I can do this. I can do anything. And that's been, an overarching theme in this whole process of like, yeah, I can do it on my own, but it's really much better when you have help and you have friends and you have community. So I've really, over the course of time, really, built that up here where I am in Portland, because there's a lot of women that are choosing this route here, and it's been amazing to watch. A group of us kind of started at the same time. We were all thinking about it or just starting to try, and there was about 10 of us that met in this living room 6 years ago, and we've all had babies now, like all of us, some of us 2 babies. And so it's a little bit different now because we're kind of in, we're in different stages. Our kids are different ages. We live in different parts of town. But, in the beginning, it was so awesome to have that support, because it is like deciding to do it. Huge step, that's the biggest step, deciding to do it. And then going from, IUI to IVF, another huge step, like, oh gosh, the needles, I don't know if I can do that. And then the step from, my own eggs, it's just not working, like deciding to do, a donated egg. And, that also huge step. So people have these moments where having somebody say like, it's going to be okay. Like, you can do this, and having that cheerleading across the, those 3 steps is really priceless.
Well, and I would imagine also on the postpartum side of the equation, there are those milestones as well. Like, I'm thinking about what did you do when it was time to go back to work, for example?
Yeah, that was tough. Yeah, I have some cousins that live here, and I went back doing night shifts. And so I would go in and work the night shift per diem. And one of my cousins would come here, or, I'd bring him over to their house. But, that was not great, because I would be up all night and then I'd get him back in the morning and then I'd be up all day.
That is insane.
It's insane.
I mean,
It's insane.
when you first said it, I was like, Oh, I guess that's nice for the person that's helping. And then I had a moment where I was like, oh my God, Betsy.
I know. And then
Oh,
I'd like try to I drink coffee in the morning, and then hopefully I would get an hour or two at work, and then like the next day I'd be like, okay, when's his nap? When's his nap? And then you'd sleep for
oh my
2 hours.
I
Yeah.
can't even imagine.
That's why I was like, let me figure out something else to do.
Oh, wow. Okay. So at what point in this journey, during pregnancy or postpartum or wherever, did you finally get this idea that you needed to do something for other people and become the expert on this?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure at what point, but I just found myself every time I would interact with a woman who was, in her 30s, dating or not dating. Oh, I want to have a baby. I'm like, freeze your eggs, go see a doctor, like start the conversation sooner than later. And the funny idea that I had, and this was pre-COVID, was, I was like, I want to like get like a minivan and like travel across the country and, just tell women like if you want a baby, make a plan. That was sort of like the tagline. And this is for all women, wherever they're at. If you're even in your 20s, like it should be a conversation that you have with your provider every year. I really do believe that. And I think, in my training, I've been a midwife for 20 years, like so much focus on family planning, like where I was about not getting pregnant, but there's just not enough conversation happening. And maybe this has changed with training. I don't know. Really discussing like, okay, like when do you want to have your babies and how many babies do you want to have? And not just for couples. Like it should be a conversation with every single woman that comes into the office.
You are blowing my mind right now, because while I deep down, like I know what you're saying and I agree with you 100%, I certainly never incorporated this into my process of doing an annual exam, but I hear you. And yet I also instantly feel the inherent challenge in looking at a young person and just like taking them down this road when they're like, what? No, I'm going to meet someone. I can hear it already. I can hear the conversation. And you even told me your version of that. So, I mean, I don't know if there's anything more powerful or pointedly, I suppose, that you could say, like, what do you say is the opening to that conversation for somebody who didn't expect you to go down that road? I mean, I realize you roll out the conversation slowly over the course of time, assuming that there's continuity of care and enough time to have this conversation, which is an enormous systemic problem. But like, can you talk us through as providers a little bit what that looks like?
We hope you're enjoying the Mother Wit podcast. If you are, please rate us and leave a review in iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to your podcast. Thanks so much. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't 100% know the answer, but and yeah, like you said, if you have this relationship with your provider, do you think you want to have children at some point? And I think having maybe the conversation about, there's age related fertility, and then there's your own specific fertility. And at some point, and this, a lot of it goes back to insurance, like what's covered. If you're like a healthy 32-year-old woman, is insurance going to cover day 3 labs? And then I mean, it's not an easy question to answer, because and this is part of my kind of education, is that you can either just assume that, I'm 32 and I'm fine, and, I'm going to wait 2 years and that's my timeline. And then I'll go see a doctor. But, on these Facebook groups that I'm a part of, like so many people say, I wish I had started sooner. I wish I had started sooner. And so I feel like it's better to be more aggressive. That's not really the right word, but just more proactive. There you go. Thank you. More proactive earlier, because some of the women are like, I'm 28 and I'm, premature ovarian failure at 30, at 28. So it does happen. So I think it's, and not having to go to a reproductive endocrinologist right off, but just, with your midwife, with your OBGYN. Like, I think about the number of the providers that I saw, and it was never a conversation. It hits home at such a personal, this desire for a partner too. I think a little bit of a, tangent, but this desire for partnership, to have a partner, to fall in love, and to have a child, like it is primal, like it is within us.
Well, and I think the part that made it hard when I put on my provider hat and listening to you talk about that I think made me feel bad about opening that door is I guess I thought that in going down this road, someone might hear the unintended message of, I don't think you're going to find love. And of course, that's not what I meant to say, but I never would want to do that. But the other thought I've had as you've been talking, as I try to figure out how would I incorporate this into my routine care, and I'm starting to feel this thread emerging in my mind. We can talk about this more one day offline, I'm sure, but it's almost like teaching people about the menstrual cycle morphs into teaching people about their fertility, not necessarily infertility, but understanding their fertility. At a certain point, now you're exploring infertility. And at that point, this conversation should already be happening. So I bet you there is a way to create some structure around this. I'm just thinking about it for the first time.
Yeah. No, that's a great way of looking at it. And again, it would be if you had this nice relationship with your provider and you're seeing her year after year, and it's like, oh, yay, like, look, okay, you're at this point, and now let's like, discuss further, opposed to like how it really is, where you're kind of, some people seeing different person every time, or moving around. But yeah, as a collective, if we at least get better at bringing the subject up, and my one way that I look at it, and I advise people, it's like you can do those things in parallel. Like, you can be researching your own fertility, investigating, dating at the same time. You're dating, you're researching. Okay, maybe you fall in love with this person, and you're getting very serious. And this happens so often, right? It's like the guy's like, oh, I'm not ready for kids yet, and the woman's like, like, I'm so ready, like, maybe just emotionally feeling ready, but like my body, fertility wise, like it's now or never, or it's now, and then we might have challenges. So it's just kind of putting the control, not the control, but just the empowerment back to the woman, where, she can say, I'm ready now. And if you're not ready, then, we can keep dating, but I'm going to use a sperm donor, and I'm going to get pregnant and have my baby now because I'm ready to have my baby. Because the thing is that we have this limited window, and it is a precious window. And there's IVF, and yes, there's egg donors, but when people go into, it's not really what they want to do. They don't want to spend thousands and thousands of dollars. So I think, like, just encouraging women to find out more information, and that, like, you don't have to have the man, like, you don't have to wait on the man. You don't have to convince the man or the woman. I'm sorry. I mean, you can also, of course, have, whoever the person that you're, falling in love with, and, making these decisions with, or not making these decisions with. You can decide, this is important enough for me that I want to do it now, and I can't wait any longer. And that's okay.
So what was the final straw, for lack of a better word, that made you say, I'm going to create this resource?
Oh yeah. So the pandemic happened, and somebody recommended a course, how to teach an online course, how to create and market and teach an online course. And so I took that 2 years ago. Yeah. 2 years. No, maybe it's even just a year and a half ago. And I took it because I thought, well, great, this is perfect. I can put all this information into a downloadable course and get that information out there. Like, this is, age related fertility. This is how you would know more about your fertility. This is, the first thing to do, go talk to a provider. This is the difference between a midwife and an OBGYN and a reproductive endocrinologist. These are the things that you can do to improve your fertility if you're, on the older side. This is single mothers by choice. Community is so important. Like, there's just so much, the information is absolutely out there, but I thought, like, compiling it from my own perspective of having gone through it, like profoundly understanding and relating to that longing for love, longing for a family. When that's not met, that need, that biological, basic need is not met, there's profound suffering, right? There's all these women out there suffering, right? Because it's not happening. It's not falling into place. They're dating, and just sort of saying, like, it's not you. Like, this is happening for thousands and thousands of us. So let's look at it differently. And maybe this is like our evolution as a species, like, because the drive, I don't think it's not as intense for men in general. And so just kind of normalizing what we're all experiencing and saying, yeah, like, if you're ready to have a baby, start your family this way, and then find your partner after the fact, which is probably a more authentic way to do it anyways, because you're not just trying to find somebody to have a baby with, which is what I think a lot of women are. That's like the main objective. It's like, yes, find your partner, but yes, you want to have a partner to have a child with.
So on that note, I'm curious if you have thoughts on, and I'm literally asking this question without judgment and more wanting to get to the point of, like, there are a lot of different ways to skin this cat, but there are people who are like, I'm just going to go date and get pregnant by accident. And like, there's all these different ways that people try to find whatever feels like their happy medium. And I'm wondering if you have made sense out of the pros and cons, so to speak, of these different paths people can choose, so that they're thinking through it a little more carefully.
Yeah, I think it's a really risky thing to do it that way, because having a baby with somebody that you don't know very well, you're with them until the end of time. I mean, you are joined because of this child. And there's actually a couple of women in our group here that have had a child with a partner, and divorces and custody battles, and so many of them have, online too, have said, like, oh, it's so much better, this child is yours. I mean, initially, I was sort of in that camp of like, oh, let me just quickly meet somebody and have a baby with them. And luckily that didn't work out. I mean, that's sort of what broke the camel's back, was that I was dating this guy. It was 2 months. And I was like, okay, well, let's talk about having a baby. He was like, what do you mean? We just met each other. and I was like, I can't wait any longer. It was more sort of the bigger picture. Like, I can't wait any longer. It wasn't an ultimatum for him. And then, we broke up. We're still friends, but for me at the time, it was scarier, the path to do it by myself. It was like, there was something about, as if there was somebody else involved, at least I wasn't alone doing it. But my advice now is to really, I do believe having a child on your own is the better route. Ultimately, it might be harder for different reasons, but you're not risking sharing custody with somebody that you don't like, you don't know. And it's,
well, what I feel I've seen a few times at least is someone who believes deep down that they're just going to get pregnant and they are not going to hold this person accountable in any way, shape, or form. But then they don't think beyond, should they get pregnant, what happens next? Because then the other person, the other parent, feels that they have a right. Maybe some of them don't want a thing to do with it and it ends up working out. But then maybe that the pregnant person realizes, oh no, I shouldn't have thought that thought, because now I do want support or help. So it can go both ways.
Yeah. And even like, but the partner saying, oh, I don't want to have anything, I don't want to be involved. Like, that's not really working out either, because then you have a child with the father that doesn't want to be involved, and that's, I mean, that's pretty major,
Yeah.
whereas like, I say to my son, like, I wanted you so much, like, this is what I did. What, you weren't a mistake, you weren't random, like, I was so intentional. And part of it, I think that like there is some ease with like, oh, I'll just, I'll go and I'll go on a date and we'll have sex and we'll see what happens. Like that seems a lot easier in some ways than like, okay, I'm going to go to the website or find the sperm, like track my cycle, like go, like it's so less sexy, in a way, and requires so much more effort and consciousness, opposed to like, oh, I'm just going to go on a date and have some drinks and have sex and then maybe I'll get pregnant.
Yeah.
So, and that absolutely is a way. I mean, it's, I don't want to sound judgmental. I mean, I just think from like, just, wanting to protect women, and wanting them to not have to risk sharing custody of a child, or risk having this relationship with a person that they don't know or like, risk even like, genetically, like if you don't really know somebody, you probably don't know their medical history, if they have mental illness, and the sperm banks are pretty selective. So there's that.
No, you're bringing up some really great points, and I don't think it's in the vein of being judgmental, even if someone listening might be hearing that for the moment. I think what you are doing is presenting the full scope of risks and benefits to every decision, that when you're really driven emotionally towards a goal, you aren't necessarily thinking straight, right? And so you're trying to provide some structure around this. Okay, exactly. So can you tell us a little bit about how your program works? Like if somebody wants to work with you or be part of your program, what does it look like?
So right now I'm in the building stages and I'm still trying to finish up the old website, but right now, currently the one program that I do have, I teamed up with another single mother by choice who's doing something very similar to this, where she's kind of coaching and educating single women about how to become a single mother by choice. And she and I are teaching a childbirth education / support group for pregnant single mothers by choice to be. So we ran one course, about a 6-month course for pregnant women. And then now we're going to do like a 10-week course starting in February. And then the following one we haven't set the date for that yet, so I won't announce that yet. But so if you're a pregnant single mother by choice to be, we have that up and running. And that's been a great experience. The women, are their, specific needs that they have, and not wanting to go to like a traditional, a childbirth education class that's, for couples. So that's up and running, going well. And I have right now a thinkers and triers group that I run on Sundays. And, it's basically a group of women. They're all local at this point, but I'm hoping to start some other groups in the coming months, kind of have a separate thinkers group, a separate triers group. And, all these are going to be via Zoom. So it's an opportunity to, get all of this information. So you're not, kind of out there finding it's all kind of amassed for you, but then really getting that support piece early on, because that's when you're swirling, like, when do I pull the trigger? When do I do this? I don't know. Do I keep dating? I'm not sure. And like I did, like, you just get, years go by, years and years and years go by, and now you're 50, and now you're like, oh my gosh, I still want to have a baby, but what have I done? And now, do I adopt? I'm 50. Like, do I really want to bring a baby into the world when I'm, an older mother? So I think just getting the conversation going and being each other's cheerleader and kind of like giving that little push, because I had a couple of women along the way who, a friend of mine that was starting to do IUI, and I was like, oh my gosh, you're doing that? Okay, I can do that too. And so there is this sort of, encouraging each other and there for them when things when they don't get pregnant the first time or the second time, or when they have to move to, IVF or next steps. So that's my sense now. I mean, the thing that having these individual kind of group coaching sessions, and I think that I want to do like a, a a single woman's guide to pursuing pregnancy, like a virtual retreat. So I think that's probably something that I'll launch in the coming months. So, a chance for women to just kind of, again, get all of that information. They get a chance to talk to me, learn from me, and decide if they want to do one of these other groups. So kind of a way to kind of, get the wheels churning and motivated, and whether they want to work with me or not, at least they've learned all this information kind of in one weekend. Do two girlfriends can do it together, you kind of bond, make, connections and bond in that way. And yeah, it's a, as like one day your business is this and the next day your business is that. So it's always kind of morphing into new things.
I absolutely love what you're doing. And I also really deeply empathize with where you're at in terms of the developing of products, because you can have you can be so flush with ideas, and then the implementation of these ideas can be really challenging. But gosh, hearing where you're at is amazing. I think you're really creating some great stuff, and I think you're going to have a lot of demand here really soon. I'm really excited about over the next couple months. It sounds like you're going to have timelines really figured out, and I'm absolutely happy to make sure that my audience is well aware of what you're doing, and that I will start referring people to you. And I'm so excited about that. Before we wrap up, I actually wanted to ask you for your biggest tips for both providers to do better. And we've already talked about one that was huge. So if that's the main thing, that's fair. But I would love to touch on some of the things that our listeners who may be in the position of being a friend or a family member or a support person to somebody in your situation. What is it that you want them to know so that they can be more supportive or be a better friend, or whatever the case may be? I'm assuming that there are lots of stories that could be told about people who have done unsupportive things, probably by accident. But any advice for everyone?
Yeah, I think, normalizing it, like, again, like there's so many of us that, single mother by choice, almost like, the sound of it suggests that, like, oh, I didn't want a partner. Like I wanted to have a baby on my own right from the start. No, that wasn't my situation. And I know that's the case for a lot of people, where I really want a partner. I still want a partner. But I really want to have a baby. And so I think, I had several friends like, oh, but what are you going to tell them about not having a dad? Or, you're too old, or, accept reality, these things that it's such a deep longing. It's such a profound longing. And it's such a painful place to be, wanting this thing, and you're waiting and waiting and waiting. So I think just having some compassion and tenderness, and not pity, like, hey, did you know, like, so many women are having babies on their own now? You should look into that. This is a really good option. It's not even like a second possible, it could be your first choice. So I think just like reminding women, if you know somebody who wants a baby, to say this is an option, and have a conversation with your provider, right? And so this is coming from the patient, like going in and saying, you know what, I know I want to have a baby, but I just don't know at what point I'm going to pull the trigger. So can you help me figure that out? And a lot of OBs will, they can do that sort of initial fertility workup. It may or may not be covered by insurance, but probably the visit would be covered by insurance. So that's kind of the benefit of starting with an OB or a midwife. I think some midwives probably have more training or more background in fertility. So, having that conversation when you make an appointment saying, I want to find out more about my fertility. I'm, 35 years old. So, a lot of this is probably coming, in educating yourself so that you can educate your provider.
I realize we should circle back to something you mentioned early on, which was when you brought up day 3 labs, which I'm assuming many of my listeners don't know what you're talking about unless they've been on a fertility journey. Then hopefully they've heard that language. But, the question that I had for you was, did you learn this stuff as a consequence of your own situation, or did you know some of this because you were a midwife? I happened to work in a midwifery practice and was trained in a midwifery practice that did a lot of work around fertility. So I kind of already knew a lot of this stuff, and I've always liked participating to a certain degree in one's fertility journey. But I know that a lot of midwives don't. They kind of shy away from this stuff and say, this is not in my camp. Where were you in all of that? And yeah, if you have any other final thoughts on how to find the right person so that you don't get poo-pooed or get somebody who doesn't know enough to get you started.
Yeah, I didn't know a lot, and I learned a lot through my own experience. This is sort of going back to something we were talking about earlier, but you can sort of like assume you're totally normal, your age is 32, 35, you're probably fine. And then you can go to your OB and say, okay, I'm ready to do an IUI. And she says, okay, great. And you do your IUI and you get pregnant. Or there's I don't know where I am. I'm going to like pay out of pocket. I'm going to go to a reproductive endocrinologist at 35 and they'll do the full workup, right? They'll the day 3 labs, estrogen, luteinizing hormone, and follicle stimulating hormone. They check, basically in your cycle, like, are those labs normal? Is your cycle functioning? Are you ovulating? And then they can check that AMH, that anti-Mullerian hormone. Doesn't have to be done on day 3, but it's convenient if you do it on day 3 because then you get all the labs done at once. But then they also check, your follicles, like what's happening in your ovaries at the beginning of the cycle. And, they'll check your fallopian tubes, make sure that they're clear, maybe do an ultrasound, make sure you don't have fibroids, take a full history. Do you have, polycystic ovarian syndrome? Do you have, a thyroid, hyperthyroid, hypothyroid? They do like the full workup. And, the benefit of that is that you don't start the process and you do 4 or 5 IUIs. And then it's like, oh, you have a tube that's blocked. Like, that's why it wasn't working. Or, oh, your thyroid was off. I mean, really, that should be something, a thyroid, they could check, that's something that an OB or a midwife could check. But, again, this is something you hear in the forums. Like, some people are like, oh, I wish that I'd gone initially to the reproductive endocrinologist, because then it's like no stone unturned and everything. And then you can have the conversation of, what, I'm not ready to do it now, but can I freeze eggs? And something that I didn't know going into it was that it's actually much better to freeze embryos rather than eggs, because embryos are more stable. So this idea that, oh, freeze your eggs, then that's like a good backup plan. It's actually embryos. And so then you are having to pick, if you're not ready to have a child and you're waiting for the person to meet, to fall in love with, then making embryos with donor sperm, is it like kind of go against the whole point of doing it? But I thought that was a valuable piece of information. So I think, like, yeah, I mean, in my opinion, like having a medical provider of some kind helping you make these decisions, but yet medical providers aren't always up to speed with fertility and don't know all this information. And so if you go to the person that doesn't, like, I did go to an OB when I was 39 and I was like, oh, I should check my AMH. She's like, yeah, you can do that if you want, like she didn't refer me to a reproductive endocrinologist. And I was like, going back in time, like, I wish she had. So I think if you're 35, if you're around there, if you want to have multiple kids, like if you're thinking about freezing eggs or embryos, you want to have 2 kids. If you have some, irregular periods, or, PCOS, or, there's certain indications where you might have more difficulties getting pregnant. So maybe going to the reproductive endocrinologist, but a lot of that stuff is out of pocket. So.
Right. So basically, instead of using 35 as this like black and white marker, you're kind of saying like, look, if everything appears perfectly normal, you have zero risk factors. Okay, maybe 35 is a good time to start. If there's any risk factors, maybe we're checking things out a little bit sooner to get ahead of the game and get some information. I imagine that in time, the more and more you work with people, the more you're going to come up with something that resembles a little bit of a systematic approach, obviously with wiggle room for individuality as time goes on, because this all really is starting to make sense to me just in this hour of talking to you about it. I think the challenge I'm having in my head right now, and we won't solve this problem today, but I'm asking myself, okay, so now we're recommending people go talk to a provider about it. And we've touched on this already, but it's this idea that you really don't know. How is someone supposed to know if their provider is coming at them with an evidence-based approach or not, if they're getting poo-pooed? Sometimes when somebody says something like, oh, don't worry about that, you're kind of happy that you don't have to worry about it because they told you not to, right? But that doesn't make it the right answer. And of course, I'm now in my head making the analogy to when I bring my car to a mechanic. Like, I just have to trust said mechanic because I don't know squat about cars. And I know that people feel that way when they go to the doctor, and that really bugs me, which is why I'm so thrilled that you just spewed out a bunch of information. But I think that it gave me, and I have no doubt our listeners, a base of understanding the language and the style of the discussion that you should be seeking. And I think that all of that, if nothing else, ends up falling into the realm of teaching people how to be their best advocate, you know?
Yeah.
I am so happy that we got to have this conversation today. I've been wanting to have this conversation with you since we met, I guess, a couple years ago now, or a year and a half ago, something like that. I remember you had just taken that online course about teaching an online course around the time that we met. And I've been thinking of you on and off since then. And I'm so glad that we got this time together, and I'm looking forward to staying connected.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure to be here, and can't wait to see you again.
Where can people connect with you? What are your...
So right now, if you want to reach out to, this is my email address is Betsy Freeman Midwife @gmail.com. And, at that point, I can just, keep you informed via my email. But then once the site is launched, it's going to be betsyfreeman.co, betsyfreeman.co. And that'll be launched probably in the next few months. But if you want to reach me before then, you can use that email address.
All right. Well, I will put all of this in the show notes. And when this episode airs, I have a feeling you're going to be a little more up and running.
Awesome.
So anyway, thank you so much. I hope that people reach out, and I'm looking so forward to sending people your way.
Thanks so much, Tanya. Good to see you.
Have a great day, Betsy.
You too. Bye-bye.
Hey everyone, it's me, Tanya, your host here at the Mother Wit Podcast. You know I sometimes invite my clients on the show to talk about their birth stories and postpartum experiences, but I want to tell you a little bit more about what those clients and I actually do together. I started Mother Wit to help people in the perinatal period achieve their health and wellness goals. That means whether you're hoping to conceive and struggling with high blood pressure or high blood sugar, or you're having trouble managing anxiety or depression in the postpartum period, or maybe you just need support and advocacy between prenatal or postpartum visits, I can help. Get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwitmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. I'm looking forward to working with you and maybe having you on the show too.